In this video, I'm going over the box office numbers for all 33 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't really see any reason to just drag out this intro for a whole minute, so let's just get started right away. The MCU first launched in the year of 2008 with their debut movie, Iron Man. The film exceeded the studio's expectations and actually became a hit, grossing $585 million worldwide. Audiences really loved the movie and the character of Tony Stark, so I think it's safe to say that the first ever Marvel movie was definitely a success for the studio. Later that same year, the second movie in the new MCU, The Incredible Hulk, was released. Unfortunately for Marvel Studios, it would become the lowest grossing movie in the entire franchise, or at least up until 2023 with the Marvels, but we'll get to that later. The Incredible Hulk only made $264 million worldwide, which is less than half of what Iron Man made, and was definitely an early low point for Marvel. No MCU movies were released in 2009, but in 2010, they made the sequel to Iron Man, simply titled Iron Man 2. The second Iron Man film was a box office improvement over the original, making $623 million at the box office, and becoming the seventh highest grossing film of 2010, which was the best that Marvel had done yet on a year end chart, and a new peak for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, the MCU's box office took a slight dip the following year in 2011. Their two movies that year were Thor and Captain America the First Avenger, and although not as bad as The Incredible Hulk by any means, these two movies' box offices were a step down from both of the Iron Man films. Thor made 449 million and Captain America made 370 million. Both films also finished specifically at number 15 and number 18 on the 2011 year-end chart. Despite 2011 being a bit of a drop for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they had their first absolute smash hit in the year of 2012. That movie was, of course, The Avengers, a crossover film featuring the main characters of all the previous Marvel movies teaming up. The film made over $1.51 billion worldwide, which is insanely impressive. The Avengers also became the number one highest grossing movie of 2012, and from this point onwards, Marvel was on a hot streak. The very next year, in 2013, Marvel followed up The Avengers with a number 2 hit on the year-end chart. Iron Man 3 grossed $1.21 billion worldwide, which, just like The Avengers, was an insanely impressive box office run. The Avengers and Iron Man 3 being back-to-back billion-dollar hits was the start of Marvel Studios dominating the box office for years. Thor the Dark World released later on in 2013, and while it didn't do nearly as well, it still did okay, making 644 million worldwide. However, considering the last two movies both made over $1 billion, I would say that despite not being a complete flop or anything, far from it in fact, I still think this was a little disappointing, especially if you compare it to Iron Man 3's numbers. Two of my personal favorite MCU movies, Captain America the Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy, both released in the year of 2014. Both films actually made close to the same amount of money. The Winter Soldier made 714 million, which was almost double what the first Captain America made. Guardians of the Galaxy, on the other hand, did slightly better, grossing 772 million. Guardians of the Galaxy also finished at the number 3 spot on 2014's year-end chart. Fast forward to 2015, and Marvel released the sequel to The Avengers, which was their biggest movie at the time. The sequel was titled Avengers Age of Ultron, and just like the first Avengers movie, a lot of people showed up to theaters to go see it, as Age of Ultron grossed $1.40 billion, becoming the MCU's third billion-dollar hit and another huge success for the studio. Later that same year, in 2015, the first Ant-Man movie released in theaters, and it had the worst performance since The Incredible Hulk. Although that may seem bad at first glance, the movie still made 519 million, which is a lot closer to Thor the Dark World's numbers than The Incredible Hulk. It wasn't a flop or anything, it still made money, but Ant-Man did perform a little bit lower than Marvel was used to at this point. However, despite that small little bump, which wasn't even that much of a bump at all, Marvel quickly came back with another billion-dollar hit in 2016, that of course being Captain America Civil War. The third Captain America film featured a lot of other major Marvel characters, including Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Black Panther, and it grossed over $1.15 billion worldwide. Not only that, but Civil War was also number 1 on the year-end chart for 2016, which would make it the MCU's second year-end number 1. Also in 2016 was the movie Doctor Strange, which, although it didn't do as well as films like Civil War or Guardians of the Galaxy, it still didn't do awful either. Doctor Strange grossed around 677 million worldwide, which is a fairly decent box office run and the 11th biggest movie of that year. The year of 2017 was 100% the most consistent year for the MCU, at least in terms of box office. They released 3 movies for the first time ever in the franchise, those being Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Thor Ragnarok. All 3 movies earned a very close amount of money to each other. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 earned $863 million, Spider-Man Homecoming earned $880 million, and Thor Ragnarok earned $853 million. All 3 movies released in 2017 were less than $30 million apart from each other, which is honestly kind of crazy to think about. 2018 is the first half of what's regarded as the peak for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, both in terms of box office and fan reception. The first film to release in 2018, Black Panther, was nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Along with the critical acclaim, Black Panther also grossed $1.34 billion worldwide and was the second highest grossing movie of 2018. The only movie that year to make more money than Black Panther was Avengers Infinity War, which is my personal favorite MCU movie. Infinity War is the first of what I consider the big 3 in terms of the MCU box office. Infinity War made over $2.04 billion, and it became the 5th highest grossing movie ever at the time. The reason Infinity War did this amazing at the box office is because it did what the Avengers did, but on a bigger scale, being the ultimate crossover. Iron Man, the Hulk, Captain America, Thor, the Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, and Black Panther were all in this movie. Basically, the title characters of every single previous Marvel movie were in Infinity War, except for Ant-Man. The reason Ant-Man wasn't in Infinity War is because he had his own film that took place at around the exact same point in the timeline. Man and The Wasp, the sequel to Ant-Man, released later in 2018, it did better financially than the first Ant-Man movie, making $622 million worldwide. It's still relatively low compared to a lot of the other films, especially the other 2 that were released in 2018, but it's still not something to be overly disappointed about. Now, at this point in the video, we enter the year of 2019, which is what most people would consider the absolute peak of the MCU. Again, both in terms of fan hype and box office. Marvel started the year out really strong with another billion-dollar hit, that being Captain Marvel. Due to the character of Captain Marvel appearing in the extremely hyped up Avengers Endgame, which was the next film after this, a lot of people went to check out her origin story, causing it to make over $1.12 billion. Speaking of Avengers Endgame, that movie was an event. I remember the hype when Endgame released, as this was the first MCU movie I ever saw in movie theaters. All that everybody could talk about at the time was Marvel and the Avengers. Endgame's release reminds me very much of when Star Wars The Force Awakens came out, with everybody getting super excited for the movie, all the theories and speculation. I honestly miss times like that when Force Awakens and Endgame released, and even Spider-Man No Way Home, which we'll talk about later. Anyways, so Avengers Endgame was an event, as I said, and it made over $2.79 billion worldwide. At the time, it was the highest grossing film of all time. Not the highest grossing Marvel movie, I mean the highest grossing movie of all time. These were previously unheard of numbers. It's absolutely insane to think about. But that big Marvel hype created by Avengers Endgame also carried on to their third release in 2019, that of course being Spider-Man Far From Home. I also saw Far From Home in theaters when it released, and I contributed to that film, grossing over $1.13 billion. Far From Home rounded out a trio of billion-dollar movies in 2019. Let me say that again. Marvel released 3 movies in 2019. All 3 of them made over $1 billion, and one of them became the highest grossing film of all time, or at least until Avatar got re-released for like the 20th time, but that's besides the point. Marvel took an unintentional break in the year 2020 due to the pandemic, but they came back with a record 4 movies in 2021 to some of the worst results since Phase 1. Although the flops were largely due to the pandemic and not many people wanting to go to theaters, Black Widow, which I saw in theaters, was the first of these to release, and it grossed only $379 million worldwide, but people thought that could be excused due to the pandemic. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, as well as Eternals, 2 movies I actually did not see in theaters, both made $432 million and $402 million respectively, Similar to Black Widow, these were numbers that Marvel was not used to, but people still kept on saying that it was the fault of the pandemic. But then, something crazy happened. The fourth and final Marvel movie to release in 2021, Spider-Man No Way Home, shattered expectations for, well, any movie, but especially a movie released during the pandemic. The release of No Way Home, similar to Avengers Endgame, felt like a massive event where everybody had to race out to see this movie, and it was all that anybody could ever talk about. I remember seeing this movie opening day, and the theater was just packed, despite the fact that we were in the middle of a global pandemic. Spider-Man No Way Home ended up making $1.91 billion, which is wild considering it released during the pandemic. People just wanted to go see this movie. It didn't matter to them that there was a global pandemic happening. 3 generations of Spider-Man coming together was that big of a box office draw. And this was actually the last time that Marvel would ever have a year-end number one, as well as their final billion-dollar hit as of January 2024, although I do have faith in Deadpool 3 later this year. Despite No Way Home being the most recent billion-dollar film, Marvel did have one more movie that got really close, that being Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It was the first of Marvel's 2022 releases, and it made $955 million worldwide, becoming the MCU's highest grossing film to not pass $1 billion. Also in 2022, Thor Love and Thunder and Black Panther Wakanda Forever both released. The fourth Thor film made $760 million, which was some solid numbers for a movie that wasn't exactly very loved. I certainly didn't like it, that's for sure. Wakanda Forever made $859 million, which was a little bit of a step up from Love and Thunder, and the film did have a mostly positive reception, unlike Love and Thunder. I saw all three 2022 MCU films in theaters, and I think that Wakanda Forever was by far the best of them, as I felt disappointed with Doctor Strange and especially Thor. Now, this brings us to 2023, the most recent year of Marvel releases, and also one of the most disastrous. They started off the year with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, a film that Marvel Studios expected to be this big hit. But due to the film's extremely negative reception, it really underperformed at the box office, earning only $476 million worldwide and actually losing the studio money. It was the lowest of the entire Ant-Man trilogy, despite actually having the best opening of all three films. Disney's only financial success in 2023, and by extension Marvel's only as well, was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which, if you've seen my 2023 movie rankings, you know it was one of my favorite movies last year. The film's very positive reception is most likely the biggest reason why it was the only Disney and Marvel film to break even last year. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 made $845 million worldwide, becoming the fourth highest grossing film of 2023. That's 32 out of 33 MCU movies I've covered so far. The final movie in the MCU, as of right now at least, is The Marvels, released at the end of 2023. And if you thought Ant-Man 3 was a flop, I don't even know what you call The Marvels. The Marvels was an absolutely massive box office disaster, making only $206 million against an almost $300 million production budget. With only making just over $200 million, The Marvels became the lowest grossing movie in the entire franchise, 33 movies in. The Incredible Hulk, that forgettable second MCU movie from 2008, made more money than The Marvels. That's simply embarrassing, regardless of the actual quality of the film itself, which I can't really comment on since I haven't seen it. Anyways, if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts on both Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, on screen right now is my video ranking every movie I saw in theaters in 2023.